Hey, everybody, welcome back once again to the Maine State Chamber of Commerce and the Bottom Line. We are coming to you from the studios of the Williams Broadcasting Group, creative programming for radio, television, and diversified full-length podcasts for the web at williamsbroadcasting.net. Want to remind you that the Bottom Line comes your way a couple of times every month. And don't forget that you can listen to us from our studio live if you would like to do that, simply by going to our front page, and then up in the right-hand corner, there's a little icon that says Listen Live. Click onto that. You'll spend the next half hour or so with us. Also, want to remind you that you can always take a look at us through our graphics, either on our website at the Williams Broadcasting Group or the Maine State Chamber of Commerce website as well. But perhaps most importantly, we want you to pick us up on demand. On any app that you normally listen to your favorite podcast on, you can listen to the Bottom Line on that as well. Also, a reminder, we are sponsored by Grant's Kennebago Camps on pristine Kennebago Lake and River, a place that I'll be spending some time on in just a couple of weeks. I'm John Williams, always joined by my longtime co-host, Patrick Woodcock, who is the president and CEO of the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. And good morning to you, Patrick.
Good morning, John. Great to be with you.
Always a pleasure to have you here. And of course, we are very, very pleased this morning to welcome Mariah Mitchell, Vice President and Associate Chief Trust Officer of Spinnaker Trust. And Mariah, it's a pleasure to have you with us on the Bottom Line this morning. Welcome.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me.
And having said that, Patrick, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Well, we always like to welcome our new guests with their own professional journey to being a leader of the part of the Maine business community. And, an attorney, for those who do not know, Spinnaker Trust, one of the larger wealth management firms based in Maine. I want to get to that, but first, tell your story. How did you arrive at your current role?
Yeah, sure. So I went to Colby College here in Maine, and followed by Maine Law. Spent a couple of years at Eaton Peabody, the now defunct law firm here in Maine, in their Brunswick and Portland offices, practicing trust and estates law. COVID hit, like many people, sort of reevaluated some priorities in my life with two young kids, and moved over into wealth management at another local trust company. Was there for a handful of years before joining Spinnaker just about a year and a half ago now. And I'm an estate planning attorney, recovering estate planning attorney, they call it now, working with our clients here at Spinnaker.
Mariah, one of the things and thank you very much for that. Expand, if you will, a little bit exactly what Spinnaker Trust is all about. And the reason I ask that is that, there are lots of people out there that are looking for ways in which they can secure their financial future and the assets of what it is that they work so hard to attain. But I think oftentimes they're confused about what is out there that is available to them. And when it comes to a trust company like Spinnaker, which I don't know an awful lot about, there's certainly elements of that you can talk about that sort of give people a sense of exactly what it is that you do for them, I guess, from a layman's term perspective.
Yeah, sure. So like you said, we are chartered as a Maine non-depository trust company, celebrating our 25th anniversary this year. We were started in 2001 here in Portland. That's our worldwide headquarters, just the one office. And what we do is we offer wealth management, so financial advising, investment services, as well as financial planning and trust and estates planning services, which is a big part of what I do at Spinnaker. And then we also serve as an institutional trustee. So we manage around $3 billion in assets under management. And of those, 2 million are assets that are under administration, where we're serving as an independent trustee, fiduciary. So trust administration is definitely a big part of my role, kind of more like the day-to-day, making sure we're meeting legal requirements for the trust, filing tax returns, dealing with beneficiary requests. But the other, perhaps more exciting part of my role is working with clients on their planning. Reviewing their existing estate plans, talking with them about some tax advantageous vehicles for them to transfer wealth to the next generation. That's about my day to day.
Right, 2 billion. There aren't a lot of firms in Maine that use
Yeah.
even that count that high. Where has that success really led? Give us a little sense of the special recipe at Spinnaker.
Yeah, I think our founder Dick Curran and everyone sort of who's he's assembled as part of the team. There's around 40 of us now, I believe, that work for the firm. It's just a really client first model. They just go above and beyond. So I think that's really been the growth leader, and really in particular we have several former trust and estates attorneys on our team, and so I think that um, trust and estate focus is particularly attractive to some of the higher net worth families that we have as clients. Just kind of really, they've always been on the cutting edge of planning techniques to transfer wealth. We also have an internal tax department, um, which is a real perk, I think, for a lot of our clients to have that in-house expertise, and then also a real estate team that sort of sets us apart. We have, I believe, we're on our third real estate fund, that where we handle that internally and do all of the due diligence. So having that type of expertise available to clients who often have, um, unique assets in their portfolios, like real estate holdings, is really appealing. So yeah.
Mariah, one of the and without getting too involved necessarily in the economic aspects of this, Governor Mills recently signed the millionaires tax into law as part of the state supplemental budget. I'm sure you know about this. For listeners who perhaps aren't tax experts, can you sort of talk a little bit about the 2% surtax, how it works, and has it had an effect on the people that you work for and on behalf of, from a discussion perspective and also a planning perspective?
Yeah, and I feel like there's been a lot of confusion among our clients. So you're not alone if you've been having the same questions. But the news cycle has been talking a lot about what's happening in California, and a wealth tax. So I almost feel like it's important to start with what it's not, which is it's not a wealth tax. It's not a tax on assets. It's really a tax on high earners. So it's income based. And
Mm.
so what it is a 2% surtax, as you mentioned, on individuals who earn over $1 million a year. And then it's 1.5 million is when that kicks in for a head of household or joint filers. And so what that does, the top marginal rate in Maine was previously 7.15%. So now that will go up to 9.15%, for those high earners that fall into that category. But that's just on the income over $1 million. Another confusion I think that we've been hearing from clients about the tax is, they think this just applies to people with a big income, a big salary. But it does apply to, shareholders, owners of a pass-through entity who they might report a share of that entity's income, and they might receive a K1, but not necessarily receive a $1 million distribution, which can be tricky and does raise issues about, how are they going to necessarily come up with the tax that would be owed if they're not actually receiving that distribution, but instead just picking up income as a result of their ownership in a small business.
Uh, and just can I just follow up on that by asking, have you seen anything as a result of this from businesses that may be wanting to locate here in the state of Maine, come here to the state of Maine, that are concerned about this? Or is it, as you just mentioned, more about income earners, and that's that's kind of the basis upon which the concern lies from that perspective?
I mean, I haven't heard anything personally from any, out of state
Yep.
business owners
Yep.
who are thinking of relocating, but it's certainly a factor because it would apply to the shareholders of any Maine
Yeah.
business, whether they were
Yep.
residents of Maine or even, you know, outside of Maine. because if they were an owner in a Maine business, that's would be Maine source income. So even if they're not living here, they would owe tax to Maine if they were, an owner of, say,
Mhm.
like a pass-through entity that was based in Maine. Um, yeah.
I want to drill into this because it's for the layperson, they don't know tax law. So, maybe it'd be helpful just for a small, you mentioned business income. This has been construed as a millionaire's tax. But this is on income and it might affect businesses. Can you kind of explain maybe a hypothetical of how this would affect a business and the consequences of it? I really do want to drill into this because I think it's important. We have seen the headlines, but for the layperson, they're not tax attorneys. They might sort of understand that businesses could be affected. But can you drill in maybe with a hypothetical of how a business in Maine might be affected by this new tax policy?
So really where the tax doesn't apply to businesses, like wouldn't apply to a C corporation, for example. It applies to individuals, and actually trusts and estates. But so where individuals who are business owners, shareholders in a pass-through entity, and so those entities, an S corporation, an LLC, a partnership, they don't get taxed at the entity level. They're taxed at the shareholder level. So if I'm a 1/4 owner of Spinnaker Trust, wouldn't that be nice? I would report on my tax rates 1/4 of Spinnaker Trust annual income, and that comes out to you on a Schedule K1, and you report that income based on your ownership percentage, but you might not necessarily, you're probably not getting 1/4 of the income out of the business. So what you report on your taxes as the owner of a pass-through entity might have nothing to do with your actual distributions, which could lead to cash flow issues, right? If you have to pay this tax, but you're not necessarily getting the liquidity out of the business, um, that could certainly cause problems. And so where this impacts a business is, so say you do have a Maine business, I'll keep using Spinnaker Trust. Um, if all of a sudden you have shareholders who are paying this additional 2% tax as a result of their bearing their share of the entity's income, that puts them over the $1 million threshold. Maybe they start saying, hey, should we get out of here? Should we relocate the business if they can, to a more tax favorable state? Our neighbor to the south with no income tax in New Hampshire. Um, so it could start impacting businesses in that way. I think also when you think about sort of on the prospective side, if you're someone who might want to start a business, are you perhaps not going to, invest in a business in Maine because of these issues and try to start your business in a state with lower income taxes? So I think that's how it could impact a business, to answer your question. Um,
And maybe Patrick, I'm just going to jump in for a second, then we'll take a break. But I like what you were talking about, Mariah, when it comes to affecting individuals. So basically, how do you feel about this from the perspective of those who are impacted by this change? For your clients who may be high net worth individuals, will this tax change their thinking perhaps about living in or retiring to Maine or coming to Maine? I mean, is that part of the equation?
oh yeah, that's a tough one. I'm supposed to keep my politics out of this conversation, but I can certainly tell you some of the initial reaction. I mean, first of all, I think I'd be lying if I didn't say that a lot of our high net worth clients who have a connection to Maine, obviously, they're with us. They've
Mhm.
got some connection. They already aren't Maine tax, like they're not paying income tax in Maine. They're Florida residents. They're New Hampshire residents. They're just
Yeah.
here under 6 months and a day. Um, so a lot of them have already planned around that and are in more tax favorable states. I have heard from one client in particular who was considering moving to Maine and said, no way, not now. Um, But that said, I do think, you know, you can't really ignore what happened in Massachusetts when they adopted
Mm.
this surtax just a couple years ago, and they've been blowing the revenue projections out of the water for the last 3 years. So I think I can't. I feel like I can't blame the legislature for giving it a shot. I mean, we're seeing this. It's really a response, I think, in that's related sort of in these our blue states as a result of cuts being made at the federal level. Um, and states are supposed to be the laboratories to try out ideas like this. So I think it's an admirable cause, certainly, to try to if they're going to be funding if funding's going to be cut for healthcare or childcare at the federal level um, to fix that here in Maine. Whether this is going to do that, I can't say, um, but I do feel particularly in Maine, where we only at the highest tax bracket of 7.15% kicked in around 60,000 or for an individual or 150,000 for a married couple. So that top marginal rate was the same for someone who makes $60,000 in income and $1 million in income, which is kind of, other states do have a more tiered structure. Um, so I guess I kind of see the why the legislature went for it. And we're not particularly out of step with those other states. Massachusetts is now at 9%, so we'll be just over that for people earning over $1 million a year. We were 11th, I believe, in the country before this in terms of highest income tax rates. So there's just to kind of give you a sense of where we fall. We we're not the worst place to be from a tax perspective. But this will certainly put us up there with New York, California, New Jersey, who are in the low teens in terms of highest income tax rates.
Patrick, why don't we take a break and Mariah for just a moment, and then we'll come back and we'll wrap things up. We've got other things. I'm sure, Patrick, you've got some other questions that you'd like to ask Mariah. But once again, this is the bottom line. Everybody, it's John, it's Patrick, it's Mariah joining you, and you hold on. We'll be right back. I've been traveling north from Norway to Grant's Kennebago camps on the crystal clear waters of Kennebago Lake near Rangeley for over 50 years, and it won't be long before I'm headed back. Fly fishing for native brook trout, brown trout, and salmon in one of the most pristine settings anywhere in North America. What always stands out to me is the stunning beauty of this area filled with wildlife like moose grazing in the Norton Brook area, easily seen from Grant's dining room on the main lodge on the shores of the lake, along with the haunting and beautiful calls of the loon as they cruise by the camp's day and night. It is truly a sportsman's paradise. And if fly fishing isn't for you, then paddle a canoe or kayak, take a refreshing swim, or walk the miles of hiking trails, or even ride your mountain bike on the camp road next to the lake and river. In the meantime, you'll enjoy 3 home-cooked meals a day and stay in cabins that are sitting on the water's edge with screened-in porches where you can relax and enjoy the breathtaking natural beauty of the lake and the mountains around it. Owners John and Carolyn Blunt, they're always there to greet you, and the fishing either on the lake or in the river is simply legendary. Take it from me. A family trip to Grants will change your whole perspective of what an adventure vacation can mean. Go to grantscamps.com for all the information and reservations, and it's very likely that you'll see me there. And we're back once again, everybody. It's the bottom line, coming to you from the studios of the Williams Broadcasting Group. Patrick Woodcock, President and CEO of the Maine State Chamber of Commerce, and John Williams, your co-host, along with our very special guest today, Mariah Mitchell, Vice President and Associate Chief Trust Officer of Spinnaker Trust. And I'll turn it back over to you, Patrick, as we begin the second half of the show.
It's so interesting to think through what is a fair, competitive tax structure. And as you noted, states are the laboratories of public policy. The aspect that I am cautious about is reviewing, well, Massachusetts revenues have increased, they've also lost population. And as you noted, you have a lot of clients, maybe they have an affiliation in Maine, perhaps they were previously residents, but now they're residents in another state, from the sales tax revenue. Washington State just moved forward with a surtax. And, when you think about best principles for tax policy, are there things to consider for the legislature to ensure that we capture people? I mean, it's better to take 7.15% than 9.15% if that pushes people to leave the state. So any thoughts about kind of creating a standard that makes Maine competitive?
Oof. Yeah, I think if I had the answer to that, I'd be in the legislature. um, but it's tricky. I think there's all kinds of non-tax reasons that people choose Maine, right? Like here I am. I'm from away. The quality of life. I never had any question that I wanted to be anywhere but here. Um, so, in terms of what is the tipping point when people are going to decide it's just not worth it to me, there just seems to be too much conflicting data out there for in preparation for this interview. You find a Stanford study that says people aren't leaving Massachusetts, and you can find just such conflicting data. It's hard for me personally to understand how the data can be just so conflicting. Um, and then I think during 2020, 2023, we saw an in-migration from New Hampshire, right? Like a low income tax state. So what is driving all this human behavior? I think it's beyond me, unfortunately. I wish I could give you a better answer. But yeah, I just don't have it.
Mariah, maybe one of the questions that I'd like to ask you today, because I don't know that, is talk a little bit about what you enjoy about working with people when it comes to securing their financial future, and providing for them a place that they can invest and feel secure in that investment. And I'm sure that it really spans all levels of income, does it not?
Yeah, it does. I mean, especially when we're talking about there's many situations where we work with three generations. So a lot of times you are, dealing with how to plan for someone who's just starting out, even, how to plan for their education. So I find that to be incredibly fulfilling, to sit down with people and let them, take comfort that their family is going to be provided for after they're gone, um, and making sure that they understand their own plan. In a lot of instances, you're plopped down a 30-page legal document and expected to understand how that works, how things shake out when that day comes. So one thing I love to do is to do a visual, we call them a schematic, um, and just show people this is the way things are going to go. Your IRA goes here. Your trust will be funded here for your children. This is how we would approach distributions. So to see the comfort that brings our clients is probably my favorite part of my job.
I did want to turn there's been a lot of tax changes both in the state and federal level. Uh, Last year's tax changes, what are the implications of that tax bill for your clients and key provisions that people should be aware of?
Yeah. So again, in my trust and estates world, the really big one was making the federal exclusion permanent at 15 million. Um, so I mean, it's been a huge shift from I think when I first got into estate planning, the exemption had just gone up to $5 million, and it had previously been at 1,600,000. Just a couple of years before. So really, the approach used to always be when in doubt, get it out. Get assets out of your estate to avoid this estate tax. But now we're seeing a big shift, and I'm going to borrow from Nat Putnam of Veril. I've heard him say at a conference, when exemptions are high, own it when you die. So it's turned more to, with these historically high estate tax exclusions, what can we pull back into someone's estate to achieve the step up in basis on their death to avoid, the income tax. And that's because everything you own, for those of us who aren't in this world, I know I'm supposed to be cognizant of that. Anything you own when you pass receives a basis adjustment up to its fair market value on your date of death, meaning all the embedded gain goes away. So in my role, we're doing a lot of looking at trusts that were set up to avoid an estate tax in, 2001 and thinking, okay, we've got a client who's now in her 90s and we've got these historically high estate tax exclusions. Are there assets that we want to bring back in? Do we want to, terminate a trust or make a distribution of low basis assets to a client? So that's been a real shift just in my, somewhat short runway in the estate planning world. And we're doing a lot of evaluating that, looking at what type of income tax planning we can do now that estate tax affects so many fewer people.
Is it, Mariah, is there for people who are listening to this podcast today and listening to what you say and what you've been talking about for the last 30 minutes, is it what's the best way for people to get a good sense of what it is that you can do for them from the perspective of explaining all of these ins and outs of the tax adjustments and what they can do with their income? Do they just come directly to Spinnaker Trust and just basically say, we need to sit down and talk with you about these things? I mean, how does that process flow? And what are the things you like about it from the perspective of dealing with an individual?
Yeah, everyone, come on in. We'd love to meet you. But no, usually we call it a prospect meeting would start with a conversation about what they're looking for, what we think we can offer, whether we'd be a good fit, because we do charge fees for our services, and if at a certain level, a fee is not going to be worth, if it would deplete your assets faster than you might like, then we might not be the right fit from a financial perspective. But yeah, I think to answer your second question, what I like about doing it is again, just bringing that comfort and security, people feeling empowered that they understand their plan and they understand that we're looking out for their best interests. They have someone who's doing things like staying up on this millionaire's tax and that so they can do something more enjoyable. They can go fly fishing, and we've got it.
Fly fishing. You just said the golden word to me, anyhow. But that's
it must have been from the ad, I heard.
absolutely, Patrick.
Yeah, finally, I just want to ask about the estate tax and our competitiveness. I believe it's only about a dozen states that have an estate tax. We talked about the surtax on income above a million. Is do estates think differently about estate taxes to avoid incurring state estate taxes? Is it a different assessment, and how much planning goes into avoiding those types of incurring those types of taxes?
Yeah, so I think where you're right that I think it's 12 states and the District of Columbia that have either a state level estate tax or an inheritance tax. Um, so I think we fall somewhere in the middle of where those exemptions are. I know, Massachusetts, Oregon, and Washington are certainly lower I think a million is the lowest in Oregon. Um, but Massachusetts is at 2 million, so we are higher than other states. We're a little over 7 million in exemption. The thing is, here in Maine, you can't use what your spouse doesn't. Where at the federal level you can. It's called a concept called portability. Um, so really you got to look at, does a couple have more than $7 million in Maine, and if so, they should do some planning around that. Um, and that type of planning, is certainly something to talk about if you do have assets that approach that 7 million number as a couple. You should definitely see your estate planning attorney. But there are ways to make sure that you can utilize both of your exemptions by using trusts. Another thing is Maine doesn't have a gift tax, whereas at the federal level, the estate and gift tax exclusion is tethered. So you have that 15 million to either give away during your life or use against assets as an exemption when you die. So in Maine, gifting can be really powerful if you're able to do that. If you outlive a gift by 1 year, it's not subject to Maine estate tax. All kinds of things I could throw. I feel we've got all types of levers to pull as estate planning attorneys, annual gifting, paying for education, paying for healthcare. But these are the conversations that I love to have. I wish I could fit them into this call, but
Well, more gifts, more gifts. I guess that's the recommendation. Well, John, so appreciate giving some insights into really a
Mm,
success story in Maine.
yeah.
25 years, it is incredible how much Spinnaker Trust really manages. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for all the service you're doing for clients here in Maine and nationally. Really, it's amazing that you're conducting this right here in Maine.
Yes.
thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And Mariah, by the way, what do you love about Maine? What has really kept you here and kept you feeling great about this state?
That's a great question. I should have been ready for that one. I mean, I love the people. I just feel like I mean, hardworking, down to earth, humble people here in Maine. But of course, the coastline is just gorgeous. I'm a sucker for the beaches and the good food and beverage scene in Portland. It's really got everything. I find that anyone could ask for in a community. So I'm happy to be here and feel fortunate to be a Mainer.
Great answer. Listen, thank you so much, my friend, for joining us today, and we look forward to speaking with you again. And have a good rest of the week, and we'll talk with
Thank
you
you. You
soon.
too.
Absolutely. Once again, everybody, I'm John Williams. Don't forget to tune in for our next edition of The Bottom Line coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm John Williams for Patrick Woodcock and Mariah Mitchell, reminding you that we are looking out for your best interests. So be safe, be healthy, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.